Hi everyone, it's Jerry. This is game 2 from the 1971 candidates match between Tigran Petrosian and Bobby Fischer. Petrosian had white in this game and opened with d4, and Fischer elects on move 3, d5, the Grunfeld Defense. Petrosian now plays bishop f4, getting the queenside pieces out first. You could also view this as making sure you get your bishop outside of your eventual pawn chain, or even avoiding a particular pawn structure. Do know that if you capture on d5 as white, you need to be content with this pawn configuration. And if it's something you're not comfortable with, you can take a page out of Petrosian's book and simply develop. Bishop g7, e3, and now comes c5, welcoming a lot of exchanges, welcoming the opening up of the position, and what exactly might prompt such a move. Well, let's look at the king positions. It takes white a few moves before he can be castled, whereas black just one. And so maybe there's a way to take advantage of this. Maybe there's a way to exploit some pin on the c3 knight. Do know that with e3 being played, there is no return of this dark square bishop. And so maybe there's a way to be putting some pressure on the dark squares on the queen side, on the white queen side, this quadrant of the board. We do see that. After d takes c, queen a5 comes, and this has some pressure on it, and not long after there can be 3 pieces hitting that square, both knight and bishop, in just a single move. So that is addressed. Rook c1 comes, knight e4 follows, and we have yet another pawn grab, allowing knight takes knight because we have a sneaky reply. We don't have to immediately recapture. In fact, that's simply bad. Our king has to run scared. So we don't want to do that. And instead, we place the knight in a counterpin. Queen grabs a pawn. We recapture on c3, and now she drops back to put pressure on c5. Bishop c4, proceeding with development. There's not a better diagonal. Playing to e2, you're staring into space. d3, you're staring at a rock. And why not play to c4? Might as well anticipate black being castled, and it's usually not a bad idea to be opposite your opponent's king. Knight d7, you're not, as black, going to just recapture the pawn. You didn't give that pawn up just to simply recapture it. You also, as black, need to focus on development. Knight d7 does just that, and at least you give white something to think about. Maybe it'll be the queen, maybe it'll be the knight, maybe the knight will go elsewhere. We do see that in this game. This is the typical, by the way, this is the typical piling up. I don't know if you'd call it a principle or not, but it's a common idea. There are many times where you could simply recapture a pawn or a piece, something that is fairly static. It's not going to run away on you. Maybe it's a better idea to not recapture, but rather pile up on that pawn. Right now it's hit twice, it's defended 0. It's unlikely the case that white can make, on their next move, a move that would defend this pawn twice. So we have knight e2, knight e5 is played. So we're not capturing on c5 just yet. The idea behind this is to eventually pick up the bishop pair. It hits the bishop, it kicks him back to a2, and it also does one more thing. It has a close eye on d3, and it is eyed yet again with bishop f5. You really can't deal with the knight jumping in to d3, so he needs to be taken out. Bishop takes, and now black has the bishop pair, but that's short-lived. Knight d4 comes, counterattack against the bishop, and also looking to remind black that this extra pawn could turn out to be a passed pawn in a great pain on the black side. So in other words, if the bishop runs away, well, this is not a good road to go down as black. So black gives this bishop up, grabs on c5, gives the bishop, and now we have some issue here for the black side. We have some problem with the black king. Where is his safe home? It's a good question that I simply don't have a good answer to. I'm not sure if he's safer on e8, f8, or after having castled, I don't know if he's better on g8. The move played here is queen a5. After white completes development, the move played here is queen a5. Another move to maybe look into is a5. This is a passed pawn. Not that it's it's really going to come to a great halt once it gets to a3. It's going to be difficult to dislodge this bishop. But maybe the other idea behind this is to have some type of a rook lift. One idea might have been by white to play something like f4. For example, if black castles in this position, maybe it's to eventually play something like f4 with tempo and have this type of a rook lift. You know, if a5 is played, maybe there is some way to have some defense, some lateral defense with this queenside rook. It's tough to say. Queen a5 is the move that is played in this game. Queen a2, can't really defend f5, so this pawn is moved. f4 is played, and c4. These pawns get rolling, and the idea here, keep in mind, with opposite color bishops is to make sure that your bishop is active. Otherwise, it's almost like you're playing down a piece, and so this pawn is looking to get up to c5 so that d6 can be played successfully, and so that the bishop will have direct sight of a square immediately or right next to the opposing king. So that's what we have. We have c4. White simply ignored that tension, playing c4. Fischer captures on e3, and it's almost like white is just not paying any attention to these black moves, allowing this pawn to advance, to capture, and white is just pushing forward. Well, keep in mind, it's difficult to even find a good home for the black king, and this is going to be a very serious threat soon enough, with ideas of converging on f7 in some way with the queen and the bishop maybe getting on this diagonal. So queen to d2, offering the queen exchange, we definitely declined that. We have the safer king, so let's keep the most powerful piece around. And that comes with check. The king plays to f8, and now comes rook d1, queen e2, and with the d6, there's a great amount of calculation, or a decent amount of calculation with this move, because black can be winning some material, but material isn't really that big a deal when we are trying to attack the king, and that's exactly what white is going for in this game. The bishop is bearing right down at that king position. The queen is not long off from forming a battery on that diagonal, and this f-file can be peeled open at any moment. So what am I talking about exactly? What type of calculation was needed when Petrosian played d6? Well, keep in mind, after now queen h5, there's two things going on. A, primary one, there's a mate threat on h2. And B, now that e2 has been vacated, the move e2 is a threat, forking both rooks. So we need to save our king. f4 is played. e2 is played. We grab the bishop. This f-file is now opened. E takes d, promoting to a new queen. We recapture, and now, well, black is up material, but what exactly are these two rooks doing? Nothing. In fact, in this whole game, which is close to ending, they simply won't move at all. Queen takes e, rook comes back over, and it's very difficult. There's simply not a good defense for black. There's just too much pressure. There's three pieces attacking, and you may also view this pawn as being an attacking force on this d6 square, ready to capture on e7 and disrupt the black king position. There's simply not a defense for black at this point. So what is tried is f6, queen b3, focusing on this diagonal and making sure that the queen is functioning as a queen. And what I mean by that is that you can very well play to c4, and I think you would maybe be viewing the queen as just a bishop alone. She's focusing on just that f7 square, but keep in mind, by playing to b3, there is also an idea of grabbing on b7. And so if e6 is played, you can grab on b7, and you can stop the queen from getting here. But look at this, all these pawns, they start rolling. The bishop is right into play. All of the white pieces are working, and, well, you can't grab this pawn either due to a mate in 1 and then 2. So in other words, make sure when you make your queen moves, you are really having her be a true queen, I guess you could say, not just functioning as a bishop, not just functioning as a rook. So a couple different directions here, and there's again no defense. Black tries to run, the queen sneaks in, pawn takes. Now we have ideas of the rook crashing through. Black is going to have to give up the queen at this point, but we never really get to see that much. After the check, king h1, it is at this point that Fischer simply throws in the towel. There's no defense to moves like rook to f6, queen g7, or even the direct rook to h5 check. For example, you could give a check on a1. White is there to block. Again, at the end of the day, you end up having to give up the queen. If she drops back here, you can always give this check, and she'd have to block or just take the rook. This is simply game over. Black is going to be lost however you slice it. So just a very quick recap of this game. Again, we had the Grunfeld Defense. We had Black trying to exploit the fact that the white king needed a few moves before he was castled. The other idea here being to, let's say, not recapture on this square right away, instead piling up, this piling up idea. And when we have a safer king in this position right here, as soon as there was this damaged structure, as soon as we have a safer king, we are not so welcome to having the queens being exchanged, so we avoid that. And with these opposite color bishops, what do we want to do? We want to make sure that we can get it activated, and we saw that with these particular pawn advances. The bishop is now there hitting at f7 directly, and certainly some calculation needed at this d6 with this d6 move. Queen h5, dual threat, but material not so much a factor when we are looking to attack the opposing king, and it was simply too much for Black to bear in this one. After move 32, king to h1 again, it is at this point that Fischer resigned. So that's all for this video. As always, I hope you got something out of it. Take care. Bye.